Hey, welcome to Northpointe Conversations, a little bit different than our normal podcast, and just very excited. And I am allowed to say jazzed, even though they make fun of me for saying jazzed. We're here with Herb and Kim Burtkett, and just so we're clear, it's Burtkett, not Burkett, right? Yep. Yeah. I've over the years I have learned, and so that you know, we already had the conversation. Herb and Kim said that they needed Michigan State mugs to match my Ohio State mug, but they didn't bring them. So you guys lose in that process. So Herb and Kim are missionaries to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. They grew up at Northpointe. When did you first start coming to Northpointe?
1989.
89.
Yeah. Yep.
89.
Mm-hmm. So we were married and expecting our first child when we moved to this area, and threw a flyer that ended up in our mailbox.
Mm-hmm. Really? No kidding.
Here at Northpointe. Well, then DeWitt Community.
Yeah. No kidding. So that would have been after Fred knows?
During the time that he was here.
Towards the end of his ministry. That's incredible. Yep. So you were newly married, and where did you move from?
From the
Saginaw area.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you moved to take a job with MSU? Or with the state?
With the state.
Yeah.
Yep. Department of Agriculture.
And are you a Michigan State grad?
Of course.
You are smart. Kim?
Of course.
Oh, man.
That's where
we met.
Yeah.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How did you meet?
That's a long story.
Her brother, Floor, I knew the guy there. He was a believer, and I just was friends with him, and he invited these girls down, and that's where I first met Kim.
Huh.
Oh, but it was definitely a hello, goodbye that first year. Because it was just like he had this long, scraggly beard. You know, today beards are just nice, but his was in bib overalls, and I was just like, hello, goodbye, and I was gone. But then I met him again the next year, and
he had shaved.
He actually had, and he did not have bib overalls on. I have nothing against bib overalls, but I grew up on a farm, and it's like, I will never marry a farmer. But I married an agronomist. Is that how you say it? Yeah. So
and what does an agronomist do besides become a missionary?
Well, it's the study of the crops and the soils in farming. So it's farming practices.
So if we fast forward and we'll work backwards, how have you used that? How has God used that? Because I'm a firm believer that God is a God of economy. He never wastes anything. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure somehow in Ukraine, some of that knowledge has come to work. No,
just growing, developing leaders and people in Christ.
So just like Jesus said, I'll make you fishers of men, you're a grower of men and women, yeah.
But I would say that aspect of his, crop and soil background really did lead us to being in Ukraine, with the potential of thinking we'll use that because Ukraine is known as the breadbasket of Europe.
Oh yeah, it's the
that's part of the way we made that decision of going to Ukraine.
Yep. Wow. And again, my mind gets scattered and kind of goes all over the place. Has the fact that Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, has that been a factor in the war, in Russia wanting to have that access, or is there lots of farmland in Russia? I'm showing my ignorance completely.
No, I think Russia's interested in other resources that are there.
Oh, okay.
The mining industry and stuff in the eastern part.
In the eastern part of the country.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or just even the history, saying this was ours, we want it back, and it really wasn't in the first place.
Yeah. So, okay, let's go back. So you move here in 1989, 90, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. Working for the state, just kind of doing stuff, having babies, growing kids. Mm-hmm. And something happened in 96, 97?
Well, we were just serving in the church. So before that, before we even got married, I really wanted to be a missionary in Nepal. So Nepal was a closed country at that time. And so just going in as a missionary was very hard. or you couldn't go in. And so I could get in with my agriculture degree and be able to share the gospel into areas there. But God just closed the door, kept closing the door for us. And so we just thought, okay, we'll get married, and God wants us to serve here and be involved with the church and help out with other missionaries that are going to go. So that's what we did for about 13 years.
Wow.
Here at Northpointe. And just God had grown us too as a couple.
Mm-hmm. But it was at that point that we did here at this church had a missions conference. And we were serving on, like, if you want to call it the missions team.
Yep.
And it was in February of 99. And, we came, and it wasn't a convenient time because it was in February. We had 4 young children, and yet we came, and we saw how God was beginning to once again change our hearts. And we began at that time just praying that God would lead us and praying that we would hear his voice. And that was in February. By August, we had a missionary couple who came and, again, spoke at this church. They were serving in Kazakhstan. And I'm not sure what the missionary said. We really don't remember anything that was said outside of the fact that when we went home after church, I was making lunch, and Herb came in and he walked into the kitchen, and he's like, "What do you think about being a missionary overseas?" I'm like, "Yeah, let's do it." And, obviously there was times where, a process of really praying through is like, is this really what God has for us to do? But that was in already 99. By 2000, we had put in our application with Send International, the organization that we're with.
Yeah.
And again, our church sent us on a vision trip for 10 days to Ukraine. And by 2001, we were in Ukraine serving as full-time missionaries.
Wow. I didn't realize that it's funny because you guys struggle to say Northpointe, don't you? Because it's always been DeWitt community. Yeah. I didn't realize that the church sent you to do that. And did you take the kids too?
We took 2 of them.
Wow.
We took 2 of
older
them. We
two?
took our 2 oldest boys because they were at that time 10 and 7 years old. And we thought we wanted them to be a part, not that they were going to decide for us,
right?
But we thought that they were old enough that we wanted them to be a part of the process.
And I'm sure a part of seeing God's direction in either opening or closing doors at that point in time. And let me just clarify at least what I remember from having heard your story in the past. The missions conference was not like hundreds of people coming here and lots of excitement and big displays and stuff. It was pretty pedestrian, right?
Yeah. Just a speaker came and presented and talked about how we can share the gospel just locally, here because of MSU being so close and international students being here, that they're coming to our back door. We don't have to go someplace to share. But, and he also shared about aspect of only 20% of foreign students actually get inside an American home. 80% never get inside a home. They'll visit other foreigners and stuff, but they will not get inside an American home. And it's just the opportunity of just bringing them in, sharing the different, building relationships, sharing the different holidays that we have, and then through those holidays, you can start sharing the gospel with them of who Christ was, especially at Christmas and Easter.
Easter, yeah. Mm-hmm. It's funny over the years that I've known you guys and heard your story. One of the things that has just been really encouraging to me is I think we tend to think for God to do something significant, it takes some big event, like, you fill Ford's Field in Detroit or something like that, or you do this big spectacular thing, and that in that God's going to show himself. And more times than not, it is in things that seem insignificant from a worldview that God does the most significant stuff. And sometimes, again, if I remember right, you guys went back and forth because you had a house full of little kids. Do we go to this mission conference or not? Mm-hmm. And I think, the number of times that I've thought in different situations, do I go do that or not? I don't really want to, but I know I should. That it's in that moment that God sometimes does his, changes lives, and not just you guys' lives, but lives of countless people on the other side of the world. So what was it like moving into a new culture with little guys?
Well, we lived up out on Chadwick Road, so we lived in the country. And we moved to Kyiv, which had over, 10 million. I don't know, a lot of people in there. We moved from a house to an apartment.
On the ninth
Wow.
story.
On the ninth story. So it was just a huge change, everything. Just physically, moving from something a little bit larger to something very much smaller. All the boys are in one room, for a bedroom. So
Well,
it was a big change that way.
I even remember, and some of the people who knew us at that time, when we spoke to churches and that, I remember us, telling people that we really wanted to learn the language. We really wanted to learn the heart language of the people so that we can communicate the gospel. But I also remember we knew nothing. We could say yes and no, hello, goodbye. And that was it. And I remember after maybe a month, maybe 2 months, and I'm not sure how many people know this, but I looked at her and I was like, I want my passport. And I want the kids' passport. If you want their passports, if you want to stay here, go ahead. That's fine. That's okay. I'm leaving. He's like, no. It'll be fine. And he wouldn't give me the passports. So probably a good thing. It was.
That's great.
But it was a couple months later, seriously. And he's like, okay, I'm ready. Let's go. And then it was me that was able to say, no, it's okay. We're fine.
Wow.
We'll make it. And so I think that was by God's grace. I mean, there were times that we were tracking together, that we were on the same page.
Yeah.
And then there were times that we were not at all. And yet God in his grace kept us where we were. So.
I oftentimes in premarital counseling, I'll talk about I've said it in sermons too, that marriage is a 100-100 kind of relationship. And what that means practically is that there are some times that the husband carries the wife through difficult times.
Absolutely.
And there are times that the wife carries the husband. And you never know really where you are in that process. And you just have to trust that the commitment says, no, there's a reason that the two of us, that God has called the two of us together or something. So that's incredible. And so in learning the heart language, if I remember right, you had to learn Russian first and then Ukrainian, and they're similar but not the same.
They're very similar. In fact, many Ukrainians, they can understand and will speak Russian. People who are in Russia, if they come to Ukraine, initially they cannot understand Ukrainian. So, there's a lot of similarities, and sometimes it's to the detriment, because there are times that I've been speaking and someone will say, oh, Kim, your Russian is wonderful. I was like, I'm speaking Ukrainian, because I've thrown in enough of the Russian words or accents. But, Rick, even in that, we really have seen that was God's hand, because we started with Russian. Then we moved to Western Ukraine, to Lutsk, where they speak predominantly Ukrainian. And we really needed to, if we wanted to serve the people, we needed to learn Ukrainian. And it was not easy, because we had already learned Russian, there was a lot of crossover. But years later, like now, we have team members who speak Russian, and they're struggling to learn Ukrainian because of the situation that's going on politically.
Wow.
The war. Ukrainians who traditionally in their home spoke Russian are refusing to speak Russian or speaking Ukrainian. But even before the war, in my ability to work with students, we had students who were coming from the areas of Ukraine that spoke Russian. And so it's not uncommon for us to carry on a conversation. The person speaking Russian, I'm understanding the majority, and if I don't understand, I'll just ask, but then I speak back to that person in Ukrainian. And so you have
and they understand her.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Again, God's grace and preparation for what might come. That's really cool. So you guys were in Lutsk for how long? No, a long time. 14 years. Yeah.
I just want to go back to the language and the difficulty of going to Ukraine.
Yeah.
Not only the apartment buildings, but learning the language. And so one of those stopping points for me was when I went down the elevator with our neighbor and their dog, and I realized that the neighbor's dog knew more Russian than I knew. And
wow.
And it's like, so it really takes you back to being really humble.
Yeah.
It's almost back to, I don't know, I don't even want to say kindergarten, but I mean,
yeah.
you're back to a very basic starting point in your life of saying, oh, I can't do much.
And so the dogs in Ukraine don't speak English. They don't respond to.
They don't understand English.
They don't understand to sit or roll over or shake or whatever. And for people who are watching, just a couple of things that if who knows in terms of God's economy, Ukrainians have. This is my understanding. So straighten me out. Ukrainians have been reluctantly tolerant of Russian influence for the last 20 years, or maybe even before that, but they are proud of being Ukrainians and proud of their heritage, proud of who they are, and so we've all learned to say the capital of Ukraine is Kiev, but that's the Russian pronunciation. So I've said to lots of people, "Oh no, don't say Kiev. That's offensive. Say Kiev," which is the way the Ukrainians would say it.
Well, and oftentimes, and I don't know, maybe this is a place where we can correct it. Oftentimes, as Americans, we'll refer to Ukraine as the Ukraine.
The Ukraine.
The
yeah.
Ukraine.
Yeah.
And at one point in time, under Soviet rule, it was an area, so therefore it was called it's talking about the area.
Oh, never.
But
yeah.
Ukraine is actually, it is a country. So you can, Ukrainians will hear that, especially Ukrainians who speak English and understand English. And it's like, why do Americans always say the Ukraine? It's like, because they're going back to what most of us, or many of us, were taught in school when Ukraine was underneath the Soviet Union.
It's kind of like saying that team up north. Instead of saying the name, right? So in Lutsk, what this is just for lots of people at Northpointe. You guys are new. You've been around lots longer than many people. So the first 15 years in Lutsk, what kind of things did you do?
So we moved to Lutsk in 2004, and we're involved with the church plant there. Starting right out. We started out with another couple, a Ukrainian couple, and just starting out basically with Bible studies and small group, and then eventually growing those groups to larger aspect and to a church. So.
Nice. And how is that church doing now? I haven't asked that for a long time.
The church is doing excellent. They're reaching out into the community and helping out, especially with this wartime, sending people to the front and delivering food and supplies that are needed there.
Nice.
They're also involved, starting other churches they have. Right now, there's some couples in the church that are going out to a village and looking at having small groups, and then eventually they'd like to start a church there. So they have a vision to reach the other places in Ukraine. But that church has also sent out missionaries, short-term and long-term. And so they have a couple with 3 children in Brazil, and they have started a church down Brazil. So the church definitely has a vision of reaching locally and then also globally. So
again, just to reinforce in people's mind, in terms of how God works and the power of financial gifts and prayer support, Northpointe sent you guys to Ukraine. You helped plant a church there. That church is planting churches. It really is. We go back to sports analogies a lot. It's the coaching tree kind of thing. This person, God uses this person to impact this person, to impact this person, and we won't really see what that looks like until eternity, and then we will. While you were in Lutsk, you talked a little bit yesterday about Andrew. You experienced life trauma that's beyond what most people experience. Mm-hmm. Can you just kind of talk about what happened and how God sustained you through that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you want me to take that one?
Yeah. Start out.
So when this is already, 14 years ago, our second son, Andrew, had just turned 16. And he had been sick and then, kind of got better. And the rest of us kind of got sick. And, it was just, we thought the flu going through our home. We were actually in consultation with different doctors talking, this is what's happening. Is this what's, what's normal, so on and so forth. To make a very short story even shorter, he turned 16 on the February 7th. And on February 9th, he passed away. He had double pneumonia, and it went septic. And our world was turned upside down. It really was. We flew back here after he passed away because we really felt that, he was becoming a young man. His grandparents, his grandmothers had not seen him since he was just a little guy, looked like a little boy. And, there's that transitional stage where they go from a little boy to a young man. And we really felt it was very necessary for family to be able to see him. And we stayed in the States for a month after his funeral. And then we returned to Ukraine for 3 months because we already had a home service scheduled. And we returned to Ukraine because we felt that if we did not return at that point in time, we probably never would. But coming back, and again, when we came back this time and we heard that Northpointe has a program called Grief Share.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I was so thankful for that. Because we thought when we came back, it's like, we're doing okay. We're fine. We're missionaries. We're walking with the Lord. We're okay. We were not okay. I was not okay. I especially was not okay. And someone had recommended Grief Share. And the closest place that we could find was either Perry or in Lansing. And so we decided to drive over to Perry. But at the same time, I'm thinking, who's going to understand? Who's going to understand losing a 16-year-old son who was healthy? He was healthy. And for the most part. Anyway, again, by God's grace, the person who was leading that program had lost her daughter in a car accident. Not that I would wish that upon anyone, but she understood. She understood. And it was through that time, and I was sharing with someone yesterday that there was so much of the time that I felt like, okay, I'm here, but I'm not here. The sun might be out like it is today, but I don't see any sunshine. And I remember the day, because we lived on Turner at this time. We were in DeWitt on our home service. And I remember walking over by the post office, and I still remember the day. And this was months later when the sun began to shine. Where it's just like, I felt like, okay, we can take the next step and continue on. And it is a process. It is a long process. But we've seen so many ways that God has used Andrew's life and his death to bring glory to his name.
Wow. Wow.
But yeah.
Herb, anything?
No, I the same thing with Kim. We've heard so many different stories how people's lives have been changed because of Andrew, and through that they're now serving God. They're walking with God, and sometimes we don't understand why God allowed Andrew to die, but we do understand how he turned something bad into something good. And even, Kim and I, we've talked about it in our personal life with God and how we feel like we have walked so much closer now with God and knowing who he is. But at the same time, we would never wish on any couple choose that to lose a child just because you can have a closer walk with God. I don't think that's it. But we have grown closer to God because of that. And so sometimes we think we walk through it, but I think sometimes he carries us through it. And, kind of like your thing about a husband carrying the wife, or the wife carrying for the husband. And I think the same thing with what God does for us.
Yeah. any words of wisdom, when people are in the midst of their grief, it's not very comforting for somebody to say, oh, someday you're going to understand. And for somebody who's in the midst of that, Grief Share is it's such a great tool. But anything out of you guys' experience that you can just speak to?
I think for the person who has lost someone, like you said, it's very uncomfortable. We don't, if we're wanting to minister to, or we want to show our care and love to another person, sometimes we just say things that are really dumb.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just being there in presence and not saying anything at all. But for the person who is hurting because they have lost someone, again, realize that even in those not so wonderful things other people say, they're saying that because they love you and they care. And there isn't, I think that there's, I would say that ministry of presence, just coming along as Job's friends, as they sat with Job. It's the problem came when they started to
talk. Yeah.
And, oftentimes I think we just, in wanting to help, we want to say everything's going to be okay. Well, not everything is going to be okay.
Right.
But God is okay.
Yeah, because you guys, how long has it been? 14 years, and you still feel the hole.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it
comes and goes.
Yeah.
Kind of like they say, it's kind of like you're out in the ocean and you're on a rubber raft, and some days it's really calm. Even though the ocean's really big, but then all of a sudden the storm comes up and it hits you, and it's like, why did it hit me? But
new wave of grief.
Yep.
Yeah, I think my advice to somebody who's going through the grief is, if it's at all possible, just hang on. Just hang on one day at a time. And that's enough, to have some people that can hug you, that can walk with you through the process. So you were in Lutsk for 16 years, is that what you said? 14 years. And then what led to the decision to go to Lviv?
Well, we had been praying for several years before the 14 years was up. And we just felt God was kind of bringing us to the end of things, because we just saw how Ukrainians were taking over leadership, and they were involved with, trying to start churches, and they had a vision of doing missionary work. So we just thought, okay, what else more can this church use us for, or needs us for? That's really a great functioning church, when you have a church that reaches out to people locally, that they're looking at starting churches and reaching further away than their current location, and then they're reaching the world too. So in short, we were trying to work ourselves out of a job. Yep. So
which is great. Yeah.
On to the others, and that's our desire. That's our goal. That's our mission, is to what is the word? To enable, or to I can't think of the word right now. But
what's the word in Russian?
Okay. I don't know. But to empower, empower other people to do, to train them, and then allow them to do.
So we were actually praying for about 3 different guys that we knew in the church, and said, okay, these are 3 different guys that we, God, if you could bring them up and saying they would like to start a church, we would jump on board with them. And it just happened to be one of them came to the top and said, he had moved to Lviv, and he said that he wanted to start a church. And it's like, okay, we can do that.
So Ukrainian Bible Church is now 5 years old.
Yep.
And you were installed, you were appointed, you were commissioned as a deacon. Is that the terminology? What's the...
about 2 years ago, they asked me to be the pastor, one of the pastors.
One of the pastors, which is not a... well, describe what that is.
Well, I don't know. It's a leadership team.
Yep.
There's 4 of us guys on that leadership team, and we're all the pastors of the church. So they voted about 2 years ago for Pasha and I to come on board as pastors of the church, and 2 other guys had already been appointed pastors of previous other churches.
So it'd be like 2 others who had already been, like in English, we would say ordained.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2 years ago, that's when Pasha, who's kind of like the lead pastor, the pastor who is the church helps pay his salary, and Herb were ordained as well with the church.
And that's a really big deal.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
It is. So it was a big honor that they voted me in for that.
But it was kind of funny because he had to be under probation for a year.
Nice.
And his sons were like, Dad's under probation.
That's so when Scripture talks in the New Testament about an elder being worthy of double honor, that there is a sense that as a leader, it really is. It's a big responsibility, but it's also a big honor. Because it's a recognition that this person lives out those qualifications that are there in Timothy and Titus.
Yep.
That's cool, and to have someone like. So full disclosure, whatever. We were able to take a team from Northpointe and come to visit in 2018, summer of 2018. And this is just my observation, and tell me again, there is not any sense of dependency on the Americans. Everybody perceives you guys as Ukrainians, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah, which is that's what it's about. Paul, when he went on his missionary journey, said, I'll become all things to all men so that some might be saved. It really is choosing to dive into the culture, into the lives of people, and to not be separated, but to be doing life with them. And so talk a little bit about the ministry that you have with couples who are getting married, what that looks like.
So we're responsible to work with all the couples that are planning on getting married. So we go through about a 9-week session with them, and it's just been great. Last year we had 13 couples. Now all those couples, there's no way Kim and I could manage with all of them. So some of the other pastors helped out at that point in time. But we have a great time working with couples and as they prepare for marriage. And then we also work with couples that are in need.
Struggling.
That need a little help in their marriage.
And do you find that doing premarital is discipleship? I mean,
Absolutely.
That,
Absolutely. Because so many times that, it's basically helping these young couples understand God's purpose for marriage. And what is that? And then how do we work that with 2 very different people coming together as one, whether it's in communication, finances, children, the intimate relationship, all of those different things. And so many times people come in with like rose-colored glasses and can I just take those off? And let's just look at what God has to say. And so it's just an opportunity of coming alongside them. And, Herb said, we have those initial intense 9 weeks with them. But there's definitely follow-up after.
Yeah.
And they know that when Herb and Kim, they ask, how are you doing? It's just like, no, it's not just how's your day. It's like, no, how are you doing? How are you doing in God's Word? How are you communicating with one another? How are you growing together as one?
Lviv is a international city. Lots of people from lots of places. Any of those couples that you do premarital with, are they all primarily Ukrainian, or are there cross-cultural marriages happening?
There have been some cross-cultural, but most of them, I would say most of them have actually been Ukrainian.
Okay. Some of these questions I'm asking just out of my own curiosity, but many of the people in Lviv have come from other parts of the country.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So even though it may be Ukrainian, they're still coming from very divergent backgrounds, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
even if you have someone who grew up in the city
Yeah.
versus who grew up in the village, there's very, very big differences.
Yeah. Ukraine from east to west is how far? 600, 800 miles, something like that?
1,100 kilometers.
So that's 600 miles.
Okay.
So a little over 600 miles. How's that for my my elementary school math? Now somebody's gonna write in the comments, no, Rick, you converted it the wrong way. It's not 600 miles.
No, you're going the right way.
That's okay. Okay, good. 600 miles across. So that's like from here to the East Coast, from Michigan to the
And
East
it might
Coast.
be a little bit farther. I just know.
Yeah, rough numbers.
Yeah.
It helps me to think spatially how far distance is.
Well, to think about it, so we had a missionary in far eastern Ukraine, and so they invited us over when we were living in Lutz. And so I figured out how far a distance it was from there, from our place to his place. And then I went the other direction and said, okay, where would I end up? So if I drove, instead of east to his place, I drove west, I'd be in the middle of Germany. So that means I'd be going all the way across Poland and halfway across Germany would be the same distance if I drove to his place. So
wow. Yeah, it's just so funny because I feel like I'm representative of most Americans in that our geography is, our European geography is pretty limited. But Ukraine's a beautiful country. The part that we loved Lviv when we were there. The fact I remember you guys telling me was that there were more sidewalk cafes in Lviv, coffee shops, than any city in proportionately
per capita.
per capita than any city in Europe. And Ukraine is considered Europe, not Asia. So yeah, that's cool. How I want to say on behalf of Northpointe, we love having you guys here. Love you being in the annex. Love being able to love on you. To do that. How can we pray for you? What kind of things? I asked that yesterday, I think, but
yeah, I think it's with our church. I shared with the audience yesterday that our church had moved to 5 different locations in the last 5 years, and that's because we've been growing, and we're in another growing area, and so we're looking at getting another floor in the building that we're at, and working it out with the owner of the building and seeing if we can expand, because the church is expanding. So you could pray for that the details will be worked out, but not only that, our finances will come up so we can afford it too. So, yeah.
Good.
So.
I think, just even more personally and specifically related to this summer, unfortunately, we're not able to spend a lot of time here at Northpointe.
Right.
Because we are on the go. And, we took a little breather as we visited our sons, and now we look at the calendar again. And so I think just stamina, wisdom in how we spend that time, and making sure that we take breaks. Because it's very easy. Because I mentioned yesterday, I feel like there's times that we have one foot here and one foot there. And that's fine outside of it can be a constant, and we really do need to make sure that we do take time. So call, make coffee, do coffee, whatever. Yeah. But that we take those breaks.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've said you guys have institutional history of Northpointe, of DeWitt Community Church, that most of Northpointe doesn't have. You were around back there in the 90s. And one of the implications of that is that many of the people who have financially supported you, prayed for you from the time that you left, aren't necessarily not even just at Northpointe, but are they're around the world. So your opportunity to connect with people is not just coming back here. It's pretty diverse too. At the same time, I do want to say to everybody from Northpointe who's watching, you need to know that our financial commitment to you all is significant. It's a significant part of your support and salary, and that's cool. We are committed to you guys, having come from here, and it's just fun to see God using you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we are, I don't know, it's not original with us, but we heard the illustration of, yes, we're the ones, Herb and I are the ones who are going out, but it's kind of like going down into a well. We need someone to hold the rope. And whether that's financially or even more so prayerfully, people who are here and who are praying, who stand with us. And we don't always see and we don't always know, and yet one day we will. And that is just such a blessing, and we're just really thankful. We're thankful for this church. We're thankful for the people here and for what God is doing here as well, because we get to be, you guys, you're a part of what we're doing in Ukraine, but we get to be a part too of what you guys are doing here.
Yeah, it's fun, even just in the language that you guys have used. We haven't talked about this, but this past fall we went through as a church experiencing God. And that process has really impacted our language and our thinking, just in terms of, we don't need to generate anything. We just need to see where God's working and jump on board. And we need to be looking for how he's working, and then just follow his lead. And it goes so much better in that path. So,
well, and I want to just say it's enjoyable to come back and talking to some of the people and just see how God has worked in their life and continues to work in their life. And so that's an encouragement to both Kim and I, that we're not coming back to a church that's like it's going to start falling apart, or people aren't walking with God anymore, but we do see people that are walking and continue to walking and growing in his will. So God's
on the move. That's my phrase.
That's
Anything? Well, if people want to stay in touch with you, is there a way that we can tell them how to do that?
I would say the easiest way is to just contact us, Burtkett K or Burtkett H at hotmail.com.
At hotmail.com.
And then just say, hey, want to be on your newsletter list, and we'll get them set up.
Great. And that's Burtkett, Burkett, H like in Herb, at hotmail.com. Good. Thank you guys so much for being a part of Northpointe Conversations. And I'm just excited to see how God will use this conversation, but continue to use you guys. Be blessed, and have good rest and recovery time while you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.